All right, awesome. Welcome, Sam. Well, thank you so much for jumping on. In this episode of the Founder Files today, we are with Sam and his business partner is Harry, who's not here today. But Sam and Harry have scaled a management company into a six-figure management company, and they're doing very, very well in the Airbnb space. Sam has also worked in tax efficiency based in Guernsey, basically building and helping structure company setups for high net worth individuals. So thank you so much for jumping on the episode today, Sam.
No problem. All good. Pleasure to speak.
Yeah. So the first question I have for you, let's roll the years right back. So tell me something interesting about your childhood or family and what that was like growing up and how that shaped you into being the Sam that you are today.
Yeah, sure. I guess I've always grown up in an entrepreneurial family. My mum, she works now, but she had a sort of clothes shop at one point. So went to be self-employed. My dad also, he has sort of mostly been self-employed most of his life. So he started sort of in the Muay Thai space. So he had his own gym. He was a DJ as well, which is sort of how I got into DJing. But then from there, he now sort of runs a couple of restaurants. So
Mm,
I guess where my entrepreneurial mindset came from is probably my parents. Um, and then I guess in terms of what led me into my first sort of line of work, which was offshore tax and structuring. It was just kind of from a money perspective with a long term view that I would at some point do my own business. Now, along that journey, it came from a few things. I initially actually got involved with network marketing. It must have been about 10 years ago. Now, it wasn't successful in terms of financially, but I did a lot of personal development through that process. And I guess it taught me a lot about money and how to think about things as well as mindset towards business. So I took a lot away from that, despite obviously not making any money in it. But then I guess from there, it led me to a few businesses, not just straight into property. So
yeah.
Harrison, who's not here, my business partner, he's my best mate, but we've always discussed going into business together. Um, So it first started off with that, and then we started an e-commerce business. That e-commerce business wasn't successful. Um, we ended up losing, I think it was about £20,000 in that business.
Right.
Um, so then it was on to the next thing. What can we do next? What can we think
Yeah.
about? Like, how can we potentially have a business in the future? Then went from e-commerce to property, but mainly into the buy-to-let space. So we were buying
Yeah.
property, but doing standard rental.
Mm,
And then Harrison sort of came along to me one day and said, "Oh, I think this might be interesting. I've seen a course online. Samuel Leeds, obviously, you went to." Attended the course and sort of learned about a few different strategies from a property perspective that I didn't or hadn't thought about before, because obviously we were just doing standard single let rentals. And then from there, um, you know, we built the management business. We obviously got into the rent to rent space,
yeah.
and I was doing that all at the same time as doing my full time job. Still doing offshore tax and structuring. So only as of actually, I've just had a sort of a share payout from that business following a sale. Have I exited that? And obviously, me and Harrison now full time in the business.
Well, congratulations on the exit and payout. That's good. Um, so kind of like to touch on one of the first points there, you spoke very much about your parents and kind of the fact that they had this entrepreneurial kind of vision. Do you think that that was something that they kind of pushed you towards, or do you think it's something that it was almost you just took that in by them leading by example?
I think my parents have always been very open minded, and they've been very. Um, supportive no matter what I've done.
Yeah.
So they never pushed me so much to say, be entrepreneurial, do your own business. But um, I've always had the support around me. Whereas I know a lot of people, especially family, when they get into business, there's quite a significant amount of skepticism that comes with it. So I guess what made it easy for me when I was trying new things in businesses, despite a few of them failing, was that I always had the support, knowing that if I did want to do something, I'd push myself to do it. And I guess the drive of just not giving up really is probably what I've learned most. I guess from my parents being in business is just keep going.
Yeah. So almost like, because everyone talks about like your network and the people that you surround yourself with, it almost you had the benefit of the fact that the people you surrounded yourself with, being family, friends, etc., your best friend and your family, are all pushing you to kind of do this thing, even if at the time it wasn't necessarily always successful. Um,
Yeah, I think obviously the important people around me were supportive, and
yeah,
there was a lot of people around me that weren't supportive, but um, it didn't mean that much to me.
hmm,
I think definitely going through network marketing, it taught me to surround myself around people that are wanting to sort of achieve or um, sort of have the same mindset as me. So I guess through that process, I did and was conscious of who I was spending my time with. Um,
right,
but yeah, it obviously did help, I would say, because if they weren't supportive, I know a lot of people that, especially in those early years when you're trying things and you don't have that support and people are skeptical about whether things will work, it does deter you from doing it.
yeah. I think one of the things that um, Alex Hormozy says it very well, and I thoroughly believe this, is that you you shouldn't listen or you shouldn't care about the opinions of those whose life that you don't want to have. But I think it's a very hard thing. It's a very easy thing to say and a very hard thing to do. So like, if you looked at your parents and think like that's kind of, that's the life I want to live, obviously you care about their opinion. But like if you had friends or other family or work colleagues who are kind of pushing you down or making certain criticisms about when you were doing, especially having ideas and failing at them, you don't necessarily shouldn't be caring about those opinions because actually you don't want to be in the position that they're in, and you're now not in that position.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you say, it's easy to say, and it is definitely more difficult to implement when you do have people around you that aren't supportive. I guess as well, along with that, I guess something inside me always said that I had the potential for more, so I wasn't going to settle for
Mm.
anything less. And anything I did, whether that be sport, whether that be just general work, I'd always push myself to try and be the best that I could, because I knew I had the potential. So I guess it's a thing of habit, really. And if you instill these things in your mind, ultimately you're not going to let anything get in the way of that.
Yeah. So when that first idea came about, how did you come about that first idea? And then what was that process like going from having this idea, starting it, and then actually failing at the idea and it not working financially?
I guess the network marketing was just a friend was in that space and had invited me to come down, so that was a bit different. Um, and I guess there's quite a negative perception of network marketing, but I mean, what I do in anything I do is always look at what can I gain from something, or what I try not to look at it from a negative perspective. And like I said, what I gained from that was definitely my mindset, because financially, I probably before that wasn't in a good position, and that was just in general in terms of my spending, my savings. So that definitely changed my mindset towards money, which then led me to a position where I could start a business.
Mm.
So that was kind of more. I didn't sort of come for it. It came to me. And then I
Right.
guess in terms of the e-commerce business, um, again, I just had that fire inside of me. And I thought, right, well, this isn't going to work. We're going to try something else. And you always hear of a lot of people that speak in business and have tried 3 or 4 businesses that haven't succeeded. And you've got to go through ideas. I find when you're younger, test things and trial it and not have a fear of it failing. I think a lot of people have a fear that they're not great because it hasn't succeeded, or they're anything less than what they are. But for me, it never put me off business. In my head, I just had learned something from that situation. I'd said to myself, okay, what do I need to do differently next time? And I think one thing I'd learned from all those losses and different types of businesses which didn't do well was that if I was to do something next, I need to be more educated, because the problem I had was that I was jumping into businesses too soon without having any education on what to do. And because of that, I lost out quite significantly financially.
So yeah, so you talked about kind of the financial impacts and how that's been. I think a lot of entrepreneurs have a very interesting relationship with money, in the sense of a fear of losing it, a fear of not having it, and that kind of stuff. Um, and you can almost treat it as like a person or a very significant thing in your life. What would you say your relationship with money was like? And also, how did you come back from losing such large sums of money in these business ventures?
Yeah, I don't think I was ever in a position where it financially was at a point where it would significantly impact my life. Um, it's a significant amount of money, but what I'm saying is it's not like I'm bankrupt. I could save
Hmm.
that money back up through work and try something else. Um, it's a hard lesson, of course, and it's not an insignificant amount of money, but it's definitely not something which you might turn around and you've lost your house and you've um, you literally can't repay loans or whatever that might be. So I never had I never had a strong attachment to money. It was more the outcome. Um, so regardless as to whether it gone well, it was just, okay, what can I succeed at next? And if that meant spending money to do it, um, I've done a lot of personal development to know that a lot of people who are successful do spend money on education. They do spend money on mentoring. They do have to invest money in themselves in order to be successful. So the money was never a problem for me. I think I was already after the network marketing and that personal development that I'd done through books like Jim Rohn and um, all this sort of stuff, Think and Grow Rich, and other books like that. I'd kind of understood that um, the money would come at some point, and if I had a fear of money, I was never going to make it. If I had a fear of
Hmm.
losing money, you're never going to make money at the end of the day, because you're scared of losing what you have. So I think all the personal development that I did put my mindset towards money in a positive aspect instead of looking at it like a negative and having a fear of like not having money, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. And how would you say, because clearly you've done a lot of self-development and been very self-aware, how important would you say to being an entrepreneur is being self-aware in the first place and doing that self-development?
That's so important. Um, it's probably one of the most important aspects, especially when you go through business and you have tough times, because if you've not got the mindset there to begin with, in my opinion, that's where it starts. Regardless as to whether you have money or not, if you're not developed enough personally and not self-aware, then I don't think you see many people that are successful, especially in the line of business. I think in work, people can be successful without a strong mindset and work their way up. But even still, to be the best at what you want to do, even in a company, if you work for that company, you have to be wired in a certain way to want to achieve certain things. So I think being personally developed is the root of everything. That's kind of like the foundation. If you've not got the foundation, then you're not going to build upwards from there. So that's where it starts. And especially when it comes to any business. I mean, even in the business we're in, we've both been in probably positions where we've taken on a property and it's maybe not performed well in the first 2 months. And if you've not got that mindset, well, firstly, the education obviously is important, but if you've not got the mindset to see a long-term vision and you're thinking very short-term, I think it's very difficult. I mean, there were times in the property business where we were very close to giving our business up, you know, um,
Mm.
but it was that mindset to just push on and know and have a long-term vision in place, and that delayed gratification as opposed to looking for sort of short-term reward.
Yeah. I think one point that touches on, and one word that I've really come to kind of keeps coming around for me, is the word grit. Is like the people who are A players in your business as employees, but also the people who you see do well around you. The one thing that I think they all have in common is grit. Do you think it's possible to teach that? Or do you think, like, how does a person develop grit?
It's a good question. I think experience builds character, definitely. Experience can also put people off, but if you build through that experience, then I think nothing surprises you. But I don't know if it can be taught. I think it's through experience, personally. And I think if you can get through the tough times, then, like I said, you'd have situations that, because there's always going to be situations in the future, and it's going to be a bigger problem. It's going to be a different problem that you've not dealt with. You'd be more experienced to handle it personally because you've gone through tough situations in the past. Um, but can it be taught? It's a difficult question because there's a lot of people around me that I know that don't have it and
Yeah.
don't have that will to just want to keep going. So I don't know. I think it's programmed from an early age, even from things you do with sport to um, you know how you've lived your life up until that point. I don't think it can be something that you flip the switch and say, right, I've got grit now. I think it's something that's progressed and comes over a number of years.
Yeah, I think it's potentially something that's almost, um, I think a very good one to relate to is sport. Because I think if you've played, generally anyone who's played sport competitively or at a high level has some form of grit because sports generally is very hard. It's either hard physical on your body or mentally tough when you win or lose things. Um, so I think that's a very good way in which people develop that grit and determination to kind of win because at the end of the day, for most sports, the objective is winning. Um, and a lot of people who have that competitive drive are the ones who go on to be successful. Um, and I think yeah, as you said, I think you have to have a little bit in you, and then it gets built over time through experiences. And the more you get knocked down and get back up, the more grit you build. Um, One thing that I'm a big believer on, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is like when I've started, I've done the same as you, started business, failed, done new things, and the essentially like the process of getting up again and knowing how to get up again and building up that stress tolerance is like things that would have stressed you out a year ago don't stress you out anymore because you've just built up that grit to it and you just know like actually yeah if I just do XYZ it will solve this problem and it doesn't stress you out, whereas previously like I might have had like a guest who rung me and had X and I'd be really stressed, but now to me that's like it's like a drop in the sand of things that could go wrong.
Yeah.
And then one thing that you mentioned in you said you almost there were times that you almost quit the property business. Obviously, there's other businesses that you had that have not turned out. So how do you know when it was time to quit or move on?
Um, I think to the point where I literally had exhausted all options financially is when would have to say I had to give it up. Um, but I mean, I would exhaust every single option that I could up until that point. So, I mean, to give some context to, I guess, the situation, we initially started the business back in 2021, about 4 years ago now. And we started in the rent to rent space. And what we had done was we'd taken on way too many units at one point. We took on, I think it was 4 units, but some of them had quite large overheads. We took on a 4 bed in Brighton, which was about $3,000 a month, just under.
Mm.
We had 2 in Manchester, which were about 2 flats, so not about a combination, so about 1.5 each, and then we had another 4 bed in Brighton, which was sort of around 2.5, but a little bit more. Now, I can't tell you exactly the month, but I can tell you exactly what was happening. We initially went with a management company, and they were basically terrible. We because we were in Jersey, we sort of were in the mindset that we couldn't manage it ourselves, so we had to
Yeah.
have someone on shore to sort of manage it. And what happened was we were probably losing about £6,000 a month.
Jesus.
I bear in mind my wage with my work after tax was somewhere around four, and I have bills, I have a
Yeah,
mortgage.
yeah, yeah. It's a tough hit to take 6K a month.
Yeah, so obviously we're splitting that between myself and Harrison as a loss. That went on probably for about 4 months. We then sort of, no, probably a bit longer. Well, but bear in mind we had invested about 30,000 into the business as well, 35,000. We're down about 20,000. We're taking money out. I mean, I've exhausted all options here. I've used my credit card. I've used loans, and I'm at a point where, like, financially, I'm tested to the max.
Mm.
I literally can't take any more leverage than I already am. So we decided to take those properties back and learn the process ourselves. Now that takes time; it's not quick. So the first 2 months or so, we were still losing money, and it got to a point where I said to Harrison, if this doesn't turn around in 2 months, we might have to consider financially what we're going to do with the business, because we
Mm.
couldn't afford to go on we couldn't afford to go on any longer, and that was the reality. So if I could have found another option to source more capital, I would have probably just not thought about it. But I think that was kind of the turning point for us to say, right, we've got 2 months here to change the situation, or we're going to have to let this go and start a new business, basically, or wait some time until we've saved the money and paid off the debt to
Yeah.
then start a new business. So through that process, we obviously realized after a few months we were pretty good at what we were doing. We took some other courses outside of Sound Release to learn specifically on how to marketing. Now that helped massively in terms of how we could actually build a brand, because we didn't have a brand.
Yeah.
So it was about how can we build a brand and how can we have a presence. And then through that process, we started to get very good, and people were then coming to us for advice, and we were sort of just giving that advice out for free. But then we said, why don't we offer this as a service? Because if we were with a company people would be familiar with, obviously can't mention for data protection, etc. But that company was probably one of the largest management companies in the UK. So we said to ourselves, well, if this company are managing, it was probably something like 500 units at the time.
Yeah.
We're doing better. Than why can't we offer the same service? And that's kind of how the management company started.
Okay. I mean, I've never heard that story before. Oh,
Oh,
I think your camera's
there
just
you
turned
go.
off. That's all right. No, I'd never heard that you say that story before, but I think that's pretty like I think it kind of touches on a few key points, I think, in the Airbnb space, which are not talked about enough, which is one, it's as much as the idea is sold that you can make a lot of money, which obviously is absolutely true, there is also 100% cases where you can lose a lot of money. And I think that people have to be acutely aware and careful of like making jumps and decisions that aren't based in kind of foundational logics or due diligence. Because, you know, what mistakes do you think you guys made to land yourselves in that position?
The first one was being too naive
Yeah,
of what of how easy it could have been. I think we came into it very naive, and we learned very quickly that it wasn't as easy as it's made out to be.
yeah,
I also think for people teaching it now, based on I think a lot of people teaching it now based on experience that maybe had happened 5 years ago, and things have the landscape's completely changed. You know, there's a lot more competition. Back 5 years ago, Airbnb were charging, I think it was like 5%. They're now charging 17.5% if you include that. So,
yeah, yeah.
you know, your margins nowadays
Different
are
ball game.
a lot tighter than what they used to be. Demand as well, obviously, supply and demand was probably a lot different. There probably wasn't as many people in the Airbnb space. So I think we came into it thinking that it would be easy. Number one. Number two, I think we were very inexperienced in terms of what properties could actually be priced at, without factoring in a number of factors. What overheads would look like, what things might look like in low season, and occupancy as well. I think that was probably another one, thinking we could just achieve really high occupancy straight away. And I guess also thinking that a management company out there that was pretty large would just be able to perform for us.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think we had an expectation which was probably way too far fetched. Was
mm,
probably the mistake we had made, and scaling too quickly. I think I see it even still now. A lot of people
yeah,
try and build way too quickly without considering or having cash flow for even like 3 months. We've had clients, you know, drop a property on us and say, "Look, if I don't make money this month, I'm gonna have to give it back."
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a story that I would tell because it relates to the point you said is so we took on our first rent to rent over 2 years ago now, or just about 2 years ago, and we had that unit for I think three before we took on our second rent to rent, it would have been 6 months we had that unit. We took on some management clients in between, but we spent about 3 months just learning the systems and the processes. Okay, like, okay, how do we actually make this profitable? Because the first month we made a couple hundred quid. Second month we lost 800 quid. Third month we kind of broke even. We were like, what are we doing wrong? And like you said, we then invested some more money and time and really start to understand, like, how do we actually play this game and make money? Um, because I think it's very easy to pin your hopes on strategies of like, oh, I'll just put it on Airbnb and do all those kind of things. And it's a completely different ball game. And the market, I don't believe the market is saturated. I just believe the market is competitive. So if you want to do a good job, you've got to actually make an Airbnb and provide a really good service. Um, so we didn't do that. We didn't scale very quickly, and then afterwards we scaled massively. But at that point, we went from like, within the year of 2024, we started with 4 properties and ended it with like 25. And most of these were all rent to rents. But that's because we kind of had spent 6 months prior learning the back end of the systems, which I think was crucial for us. And I know what you're saying. It's like you get people who just drop you a message and say, I'm already 3, 4 grand in the hole. I haven't learned the process. I've got 3 units and they're just bleeding money on all of them. And then it's a very hard, like, to come back from that is very hard because usually these type of units, they need investment in the first place to actually get them to the standard where they are going to perform.
Yeah,
And I think that's another key learning that I took is like, you can't do a scrappy job of like putting the listing together, putting the unit together, the staging, everything has to be high quality essentially.
yeah.
So
I think a lot of people that we see, um, I think a lot of people want a lot for nothing. Not just from this goes from a quality perspective on the
Mm,
property, to
yeah,
also coming from an expectation perspective on what
yeah,
they think it might make. But then again, I think this comes back to inexperience from what we were saying, because we took on, for example, these two flats in Manchester at the time. The rents were 1750 on a two bed. We managed to negotiate those rents down to
that's quite
15.
high.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, but again, being naive and thinking, oh, this is what we could achieve on a nightly rate, when actually it wasn't. And we were past those deals by a deal sourcer, but I don't have anything to blame for the deal sourcer, because ultimately it was my decision and Harris's decision to take that on based on our analysis. And I think holding ourselves to account for the issues is probably like one thing I'd say we do a lot of, and being accountable for mistakes rather than putting blame on someone else for the situation. Because at the end of the day, we've made the decision. It's our responsibility. We need to fix it. I think that's how we've always gone along in terms of business. Um, so, yeah, I guess that's kind of probably, I'd say, the biggest learning curve is just actually understanding the reality, which is you can be profitable, but you need to be good at what you do. You can't just expect a lot for nothing.
yeah. No, I completely agree with that. I think one of the expectations that needs to shift in the Airbnb space, and one I try to push very, very heavily, is like you can make £1,000 per unit per month, if not more. But you have to find the deal yourself. You have to manage it yourself. You have to have a team. You have to be the one doing every single one of those things to get those kind of figures. If you start bringing in deal sources, staging companies, management companies, you can't be expecting those same returns. And I think that touches on your point of expectations. It's like, I think people, through two ways, either being sold the idea or being naive, think that like, I'm going to start this entire business and then hand it off, to a deal source, a staging company, a management company. So actually, they're not running any of their own business and are still expecting to make like 300% return on their investment. And I think that's a belief that needs to be broken of like, you can still make money doing it, but your returns are going to be far lower than what you thought they were.
Yeah, I think we've actually stopped deal sourcing completely now. That was one arm of the business,
So
just because we find it very hard to. I think the idea that's pushed out there by deal sources and the numbers that are pushed out there sets an expectation for people that come to us for what they think they would be able to achieve on a property which is fully managed. Now, we've always been very conservative in terms of where we put our numbers, for the very reason is we've gone through the experience of knowing of how things work and what is actually being able to be achieved based on a certain strategy that we do. And we've started to find that very difficult in the last 6 months. I'd say probably last 3 months really, and probably the last month we've really made a decision on it to say
yeah,
we're not going to do that anymore, because for us it's been too difficult to manage expectations for
mm,
people that, and I think this comes down to just deal sourcing in general. I think a lot of deal sources out there sell deals who don't have experience, and maybe not out of maybe because they just want to push a deal through, or maybe because they're just inexperienced. I think it's a
yeah.
combination of the both.
No, I agree.
Deals are sold very inflated, and then people buying deals have an expectation of what a deal should look like based on other people's numbers, which are very unrealistic.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think like one of the things that like what I say is, for example, is the a lot of people who are buying deals or a lot of people who are working with deal sources, these deal sources have never, let alone let's say managed ed, but they've never even run their own rent to rent. So for them to give you accurate figures is a very hard thing to do. To give you the most accurate figures would be a direct comparable, very close, and they're running that property so they know exactly what nightly rates they're achieving. That's really like the best way to do it because doing due diligence on Airbnbs is hard because the price changes, everything changes all the time, as you will know, and anyone who actually runs Airbnbs knows that. Um, So I think that's one thing that's super important. And then another thing that I touch on as well is like, as the investor, you cannot just blame the deal sourcer because the the deal sourcer has everything to gain and nothing to lose. And now that's not to say that every deal sourcer is out there is trying to scam you, but it means that in this position, you are the one who's putting the money in. You are risking the capital. The deal sourcer only has stuff to gain. So you have to be very smart and on it with your due diligence to take that on and make sure it is a success and being very, very careful about that. And I think that's unfortunately like with the naivety that you talked about, a lot of people lack that and make that mistake and end up getting burnt.
Yeah,
And
it's
it puts a bad name on the industry.
yeah, definitely. And also I just think it comes down to an expectation point of view again from potentially education because I can pick out an example we had recently where we sourced a client a property. You know Brighton very well, so
Yeah.
the rent for the two beds we sourced them was 1350, which is very good for a two
I
bed.
mean, I pay 1800, so
Yeah, I mean it's not quite BN1,
it's
it's in BN2, but even still, rent wise, great. We took the property on in December. January we made a profit. February we made a loss, and March we broke even, which in Brighton is not bad for a fully managed property where generally Q1 is pretty terrible in Brighton, and you
mm,
would generally make your money onwards, as you probably know, in the summer months. So we weren't in a bad position, put it that way, like
no.
in terms of the 3 months managed. Now, I obviously can't share names, etc., but that client, was threatened to go on social media with us saying about the performance,
Mm,
because their expectation was that every month should be making a profit. But as you know, in Brighton, unfortunately, January and February, you're pretty much marketing to break even. You're not really
yeah,
marketing to make much of a profit in those months. And, through that, we actually ended up having to give the unit to that client to manage because we couldn't manage the expectation.
I think it's a catch 22 in the sense of the you have to, as the management company, you have to be very careful, and as the client, they have to be very careful. And like, if you are on both parties, you need to be. If you as the client don't know the area that you are buying into, that's a risk, and you're taking a big risk there. And then as the management company, you obviously have to set the expectations. And I think obviously there's clearly been a misalignment and a miscommunication on that. Um, And I think that's one of the reasons that we personally stepped away from deal sourcing, and probably you doing the same, is having essentially it was we were finding it incredibly hard to deal with clients who essentially because you take them through the A to Z, it also means that they expect every single thing from you at a discounted price. And one of the things that I've learned in business, which is why we're growing our management company, but specifically on management, is if you actually do one thing really well, you can charge more and make more money that way than doing multiple things in a process. Because if you give everything in the process, you have to give a discounted price, really. Like you can't charge full
Yeah.
whack for everything. And that was kind of one of the decisions we made. And the deal sourcing one was the one that just least aligned with our kind of goals, what we enjoyed, that all that kind of stuff. So I think it's very hard, and I think people again need to be aware that like we took on a block of 8 flats recently, 2 3 months ago. First month we lost, the rent on that is nearly 12 13 grand a month. I think the first month we lost 4 grand, but we knew that because next month we're probably going to make 8 or 9 grand profit on it, because of basically bookings that we've got lined up. But if you've not been through that period and known that experience, it's very hard to kind of see that as soon as you see the losing money. So it's very much a tough game to weigh up in that whole
Yeah.
management Airbnb deal sourcing space.
Yeah. I think the management business is what we're growing now. We've now scaled to we're about 95 units now. But one of the things which I think from a management perspective, is the hardest thing to do is managing expectations. That's just the hardest thing in the space. You get a range of people from, you know, landlords to people that have rent to rents, that people that have taken on deals too expensive, and you're just trying to make them a small margin. You've got people that have literally just been sourced a deal, and maybe it's too expensive, and they've been given it to you for management, but it doesn't quite work with management, so you're trying to make it work. So managing expectations is probably the hardest thing in this space, in my opinion. But I think in general, we do pretty well. We've retained about 90% of our clients, some of which we've had for over a year. So I'd say, you know, probably at least 95% of our clients, you know, they're in a good position, they're happy. But of course,
Yeah.
you know, you're managing, the bigger you scale, the more units you take on, you're always going to have a number of clients where, you know, they're not going to be satisfied, or there's going to be something. And that's just part of the game when you scale with volume. You know, when you're managing one or two units, you're probably going to be all right. You can give those clients all the attention they need. Not that you wouldn't do anything different to what you're doing when you've got 95, but generally, if you look at it on economies of scale, you're going to have some clients which are going to be unhappy for one reason or another. So that's probably the hardest thing I'd say from a management perspective that we find, is just managing client expectations.
So how would you say that you do that? Is that via, how are you managing these clients' expectations? How do you also communicate with these clients? Because obviously, if you've got so many properties and so many clients, you can't necessarily have WhatsApp groups with all of them because it's gonna blow up your phone. So how do you essentially manage those expectations and keep that clear kind of line of communication?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we've pretty much systemized the entire business now. We've got 8 full-time virtual assistants that work for the business, so operationally that pretty much runs itself. I don't really have to touch it. We only recently moved our clients out from WhatsApp, and we're now using sort of a centralized place, which is Discord. So we use that sort of for our client communications. Now we've had to set an expectation for clients, because what we found is that they sort of expect, especially when you're very accessible on phone, they sort of
Hmm.
expect a reply no matter what the time. Now what we've had to do from that standpoint, and to set an expectation, is that we do work business hours 9 till 5, and if there is something urgent in terms of maintenance or something that the client really needs to be informed about, then the team will call them out of hours. But I think I think if you don't set the expectation, then clients think that they can sort of contact you at any time, and you do need a life at the end of the day. You know, I do need some time to be able to spend with my family. I do need some time to spend with my girlfriend. I do need some time to be able to do the things that I want to do, not just being readily available 12 hours a day, you know, 9 till 9 p.m., being available for clients. So I think setting an expectation with them that, you know, we're a business, you know, we are working during working hours, and that if something's not picked up that day, it will be picked up the next day. So I think it's just important to be very transparent, in terms of how you're going to communicate. Transparent in terms of where you're going to price as well is really important. So I think the more that you can be transparent in the beginning, the easier that it will be in terms of a relationship moving forward.
Yeah. No, I completely agree and understand that. So how have you then systemized and build processes in place with your virtual assistants and that kind of stuff to almost take a lot of the operational burden off yourself so you can work on the business?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a hell of a lot. I'm just about to charge as I speak, but yeah, I mean, we were managing 35 units before we even brought in a VA.
That's a
So
lot.
um, I guess my mindset to begin with was very much, you know, I'm the best at what I can do, and I don't think anyone can do it better. Now, that's not from an ego point of view. It's just more so because I have a high expectation, and in my mind, it would have been difficult to replicate what we were doing. because I hold such a high standard to myself.
Yeah.
We got to about 30 units and we realised, okay, we're probably not going to be able to do this for ourselves, and we were working way too much on the business. So I DJ in the evenings on Friday and Saturday, and there'd be times where I'd be mixing with people in the audience, like in a club, like 500 people, and I'm replying to guests on how to check in. So, yeah, I guess at that point, we realised if we really want to scale this, we've got no option but to start looking for employees. So I guess that process started. We took on. Sorry, mate. I'm just going to do
Yeah,
that.
camera's gone. One
There you
sec.
go. So yeah, I guess through that process, we employed our first VA. It would have been June last year, or maybe just before, maybe about April last year. So we took on our first VA, and there wasn't really a process for them to follow when they came in. It was sort of just chuck everything at them, and luckily they had a lot of experience. But what we learned through that process was that I think a lot of the people that you employ for a virtual assistant type role, you have to be very specific on what you give them. I don't know if it's a communication barrier thing with people in the UK, and most of us are in the Philippines, but we do find that if you're not very specific and you sort of are providing a step-by-step instruction of how to do a certain process, things will get lost in communication. So we first implemented a few softwares to help with this. We started to record a lot of Loom videos for our employees. So we started to build sort of a standing operating procedure where every employee would go to for certain questions. Because one thing that we found when we started to take people on is it was helpful, but we were getting questions. So it was like we're spending time trying to teach them to do it, and we're still doing the same thing basically. They're not doing it without the help of us. So one of the questions me and Harry had was, okay, how can we be in a position where we're not worried about them day to day and they can sort of just go about their job? And I think there's a few things. One, we obviously had to implement some sort of communication channel. So we implemented Slack for our business. So Slack we use mainly just for internal communication and we sort of segment that out into very specific channels for certain things, whether that be maintenance, whether that be cleaning, whether that be calendar management, whether that be marketing. So we've split that out to sort of make it more precise, and we've now sort of as we scaled, we realised that it was much better to have certain VAs focus on one aspect of the business and one aspect only, rather than trying to do every role being maintenance, cleaning, guest comms, client comms. So what we realised, it worked much better and it allowed us to scale quicker. And we were noticing a lot better quality when we gave our virtual assistants one thing to do and one thing only. So I think, and again, you're probably in the situation as well, but and you've probably been in the same situation as what I'm speaking about. But doing that, it'll put you in a position to one, allow you and be comfortable that if you're taking on new units or more units significantly, that all areas of the business are covered and nowhere's lacking. Because one thing that we found is, okay, they'd be very good at picking up maintenance, but cleaning might be missed, or they'd be very good at picking up cleaning and then we lacked in guest comms, so reviews have dropped a little bit. So I think fast forward to now, a few things that we've done to, I guess, have the business as systemized as possible. So like now I could probably go a week without looking at my phone knowing that the business will run. Is one, building procedures to make things as simple as possible, step by step. So think of it as someone, even if they've got Airbnb experience, we look at everyone coming in as someone who has no experience. Training them specifically on every aspect of our business step by step, because a lot of these VAs that come in, they would have worked for other companies, but they might be following other processes, and then they've come into your company, they're going through a whole different process, but they're not following what you want, and then you're getting frustrated because they're not doing exactly what you want in terms of your business. So I think having videos, Loom videos are really good. We do a lot of
Yeah,
Loom videos.
Loom is one of the greatest softwares that I've integrated in very recent, or not very recently, but I've been using over the last couple months.
Yeah, it's so much help, and it saves you the time of having to train that employee, because otherwise you're still wasting your time spending hours trying to teach them through a process. So what we do is we, for every single process, whether that be onboarding a property, whether that be how to hire a cleaner, whether that be how to source maintenance, whether that be how to purchase items, whether that be how to handle guest comms, how to sort of build all your automated messages in your channel manager. Everything is done step by step, step 1 to 10 through videos. And then what we've done is once we've taught someone that process, generally we don't actually do the videos. We get the VAs to do the videos. So again, it saves us the time of having to do the video, because once we've shown them the process. So initially, you're not going to have the video. You're going to have to show them the process. So teach them the process, and once they've been taught the process, get them to create the video. So that's one thing that we've done to sort of save our time of having to do that through every aspect of the business. Yeah, a few things. I mean, obviously, your channel manager is really important for your systemization, your messaging. Slack, obviously, having a CRM is really important. So we record everything in ClickUp, whether that be everything from maintenance to cleaners to key safe codes to client emails and phone numbers. Everything's recorded in our CRM. We have one centralized place that we go for absolutely everything. So those two systems alone have been massive in terms of the business. And yeah, I think it's just making sure you've built procedures. I think having a business with procedures. I mean, even you can think of when you've worked in certain places. Like if I go back to the trust business where I worked in, for every single process, whether that be how to structure a loan, whether that be how to hold a board meeting, everything would be separate in a different procedure. And if I ever got stuck, rather than going to my director and saying, I don't know what to do here, and her wasting her time on growing the business, I would go to that procedure, spend my time there. And then if I didn't understand it, I would then ask for help. But that's sort of the first, should always be a first point of call. So I think when you start to bring in people into the business, you need to build yourself a procedure for every single aspect of your business, whether that be accounting, whether that be where you save invoices, receipts, whether that be, how to set up your listings, whether that be how you do your marketing and what you expect for them to do. And the other thing which we've implemented now is timesheets for our VA, so that we can keep track of what they do on an hourly basis, and we can report on what they've done. And if we see a lack of performance, for example, if we're one of our employees, she specifically is focused on pricing and calendar management. Now, if we see a bookings lacked and she's telling us what she's doing in an hourly reporting and it doesn't quite match up, or we're not seeing the bookings come in, then we know something's gone wrong from that point of view. So that's one way that we keep oversight of everyone to make sure that they're sort of doing the role that
Yeah.
they're doing.
If you want a software that I've been using for the VAs, it's called Monitask. And that's really good because essentially it tracks like they just turn it on. It tracks exactly what little bits they've been doing hour by hour, and it just takes like screenshots of their computer screen, and then it saves that. But it saves the hassle of them having to go through and like fill out a timesheet and everything. So it just does it all in the back end, and you just invite team members. It's honestly
Yeah, that sounds
that's
pretty
been
clever. Yeah.
that's really good for it just saves the time of having to like fill out timesheets. Like you can just click through and see, and like if you're like if you start to notice a VA where you're like you're working 9 hours, but I'm only really feel like you're doing 5 hours of output. It's quite good to go through because you can literally see what they're doing, and it'll tell you like how efficient they're being, all kinds of stuff. It's really good,
Okay.
and it's not
What's
expensive.
what's it called? I'm going to write that down.
Money task, like Moni and then task.
Okay.
So yeah, we've implemented that with our VAs.
Okay. Might look at that. That
Yeah,
sounds interesting.
yeah. I mean, it's super interesting. Um, okay, one thing I think you very much touched well on procedures and SOPs and stuff, and I think that's I think that's a learning that everyone makes when they take on they get their first VA and they hire them, but then they're like, right, I don't actually know what I want you to be doing, and you just start throwing things at them,
Yeah.
and there's no onboarding procedure. There's no way for them to log the jobs they're doing. There's no way for you to log what jobs they should be doing, and you're just kind of like, it's very like informal. And I think you again, um you have to go through that learned experience. You can't just like is even if someone tells you it, you still have to go through that experience of doing it firsthand, going like, oh, this isn't working as well as it should, before you actually um, go and learn from that. One of the things that I also want to know is what is your scaling strategy to go from 35, 40, 50 units last year where you're at to now being at 95, so almost doubling the business. What is your scaling strategy in growing your management company so effectively?
Yeah, I think what we do very well is firstly looking internally for opportunity. Um, Now, this you can only really do if you're performing well, obviously, because if you're performing bad, there's not really going to be much internal opportunity. Because number one, your clients aren't going to want to take on more properties. Number two, they're probably not going to speak to their friends about it if they're performing poorly. So we see about, I would say about 40% of our growth is through referrals, and that's through existing clients that pass us contacts. Um, in the beginning, most of our business was being scaled through mainly direct marketing. So we were doing a few things. The first was we were attending networking events and telling people what we were doing. Number two, we were outreaching on Airbnb. So we would look at calendars that weren't
Yeah,
full
empty.
and we'd contact those guests, clients, sorry, or landlords. And number three, um, we were staying in properties which weren't booked and getting landlords' numbers that way. So every time I come
That's
up
quite
with
clever.
a networking event, I just stayed in an Airbnb which was performing poorly, and through that we built through contacts of people and sort of said, "Oh, we run an Airbnb business. We can see your calendar's not full." And these were. I remember one, for example. I stayed in a flat. It was central London, Zone One, and
That should never not be
it
booked.
should never not be booked. Yeah, it was a weekend, and I basically waited up until the week I'd went, noticed it wasn't full, and checked their calendar forward 3 months, and they still hadn't had bookings. Now I checked in, the check-in procedure was terrible. The marketing was pretty terrible. I could tell. The property was okay; it wasn't poor, but through that contact with that client, made a connection. Obviously, then looked for management. So those were the three ways we were doing it. We're probably not really. We've not attended a networking event for about a year now. We've not outreached for about a year also, and we're not really doing the Airbnb because I got a bit tired of staying in poor
It's more, yeah,
Airbnbs. um,
it's more stuff you do when you're starting out, not stuff that you necessarily
yeah,
need to do when your business is more developed.
yeah, exactly. So I think most of it's referrals, 40%, and about 60% of it is Google. So we do a lot of Google SEO. So we have someone specific in for our website, and we have someone employed who works full time just on Google SEO in the business, who
Right.
is from the Philippines. And all they do is build landing pages and boost SEO. That's their full time role. So, for example, if you typed in contractor accommodation in Manchester, not even our branding, we would probably come up on the first two pages. So,
Yeah.
every location that we're targeting, we are building a presence through Google, which is where we see most of our inquiries come through now. Now, that takes time. It's not something that you can just build overnight and you can
Yeah.
be featured on the first 2, 3 pages. It depends on how many people click on your website, how much time you're spending on building landing pages, all that sort of stuff. So that's where we're seeing the majority of our referrals coming now, is through Google, specifically just target. So we've got 5 areas now that we target. One is London, one is Brighton, one is Manchester, one is Leeds and Liverpool. So they're the 5 areas that we're focused on now to
Mm.
build our SEO to focus. And you'll see it. You see a few companies there that do it really well, that don't spend money on ads. Sites like Comfy Workers, management companies like Host or Guest Ready. You see they've not spent money on ads, but every location that you search for management or you search for contractor accommodation, they will likely come up on the first page.
Hmm.
So we've seen a massive benefit of just getting very good at Google.
Yeah. No, I mean that's one of the things that we're working. My mum, who's done SEO in the past in her previous job, she's working on that massively at the moment, um, to scale our Google SEO because our website we're going through a whole revamp and redevelopment stuff like that. So we definitely see the benefit in it, but it's a much longer term play of
Yeah,
like, you need to spend all that time ranking and getting up those listings first, which for us will take some time.
yeah.
Um,
It took us about 6 months to
yeah,
get to the point where we started seeing our our website on the first 3 pages. It's not something that it happens overnight. It does take a process, but once you're there, it's then just about maintaining it. So I think actually, funny enough, just had an email through yesterday, and just last month we had 15,000 impressions on our website
yeah,
through Google. So you know, and I think it was something like 1,000 clicks. So it does take time, but once you're there, we're seeing a lot come through. We're seeing a lot of landlords come that are looking just for rental. We're seeing a lot
mm,
come through for bookings as well. A lot of direct bookings, like we get a
yeah,
lot now through Google, um, just through that. And yeah, obviously the management. That's kind of how we're scaling quite significantly at the minute.
yeah. No, I think that's super valuable for those seeing kind of creative strategies of just starting out, of like get their first couple units, and then versus like where do you do it when you start to scale and grow? Because I think the issue for a lot of people starting out, especially in the Airbnb or management spaces, they don't know how to get leads. They can't get leads into their business for landlords or management clients or whatever. And I think um, there is an undervaluedness on networking, like direct marketing, as you said, um, and also a lack of creativity. I think people just go on Open Rent, Spare Room, Gumtree, do that shebang, do it
Yeah,
over and over again, and then they're competing with 10,000 other people. And I think there's a lack of creativity of like, okay, how can I get this landlord's phone number? How can I get this deal? How can I do X, Y, Z? Like being a
yeah.
bit more creative in your outreach.
I guess one piece of advice I'd give, not just in management but in business, is always be flexible. I think I see a lot of people, especially new management companies or new people that are wanting to build business relationships, will be so fixed on the price that they want to charge without seeing a longer term view of what that relationship could be. So there were
Yeah,
times in the beginning
absolutely.
we were offering 7.5% management fees,
That's
uh,
nuts.
where we were saying, look, we'll take it. Even some situations where we said, look, we'll take it for free for a month,
Yeah,
see what we can do, and then after that, we'll charge you a management fee. So I think it's being flexible on just in general, and you have to remember you're starting out. You've got competition here that you're competing against, where people have a lot more experience. They're probably a lot better than you. Um, and you need to be flexible in situations just to bring in business. And I think once you start to, it will naturally grow organically once you've done that, because you're bringing in a few clients. Maybe you're bringing them in discounted, but you're doing a good job for them. And then it's about, okay, speaking to them. Do you know anyone else? Also offering maybe referrals. If you bring us someone, we'll pay you a certain amount of money. It's
yeah,
I think don't get so fixed on the short term on the short term financial decision, and think much more longer term. That's what we've always done. Um,
yeah,
so that's something which I find, especially people who are successful in business. Um, a lot of people will. I see a lot of flexibility, and if you're so rigid on, okay, I'm going to charge 3 grand for a source fee, you've not sourced a deal before. Who's going to trust that in you to, especially you being new, you've never been in property. Maybe charge them £1,000.
yeah.
It's all about. I think have a long term view of where you want to be in, and don't think so short term. I think that's really important in business.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would touch on is like what we would even take on properties from like agents or portfolio landlords for our rent to rent business, and we'd be like, we don't even care if it makes that much money. We just want the relationship. And we saw like there's so much more money and value to be had out of this relationship. I don't necessarily mind not making the most amount of money and value now because I saw the longer term play in it. And I completely agree with what you're saying there is like offer offer as much free value and offer as much as you can at the best price that you can because at the end of the day, as you said, why if you're completely new, why should they work with you? Why should they go with you over someone else who's got probably handfuls more experience for whatever reason? Um, and there's connections and deals that we've done which have, let's say, changed the course of my life and they changed the course of our business, and probably the same for you, purely by being willing to be flexible, negotiate, and sometimes not always doing everything on your terms. Now, there's a caveat to that of like, don't let yourself be completely undervalued that it's pointless, but you need to be kind of smart with how you play those things and weigh that up as not just a monetary value, but the subjective value of that relationship or whatever as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's not to say don't be a pushover and just take on anything and let someone bring your pricing down. It's just think of it from a long term perspective. And again, it's a relationship to relationship point of view. If you're speaking to a landlord that's got 100 properties, don't be so fixed on a 15% management fee.
Yeah.
You could see potential long term view there. And we were like that up until about 10 units, and then once we got to about 10 units, we said, right, okay, now we built a little bit of a foundation here. We're doing a good service. Now let's
Yeah.
charge what market's charging. But it's
Yeah,
just being
absolutely.
sensible with it.
I think it goes on both sides of the coin of like as a management company you can do that as you get more reps and you get more kind of case studies you can push that up. But it's the same as your Airbnb. Like so many people go in there like I need to charge £150 a night, and it's like no, you need to be as competitively priced as possible, get as many reviews in the door so that you can start to push your nightly rates up. But like the longer you run your Airbnb, the more profitable it's going to be. But people immediately need to go like I need to make this profit instantly, and again, they don't see the long-term picture. If you run a listing that's got 100 reviews over 2 years, you're going to be charging way more than a listing that's just come live. And like that's why the hotel companies could charge like ridiculous amounts per night compared to Airbnbs because they've got the respect. So like someone comes in, they know what Holiday Inn is. They may not always think it's the best experience or the best service, but they know what Holiday Inn is. Whereas booking your Airbnb is a far bigger risk, and people are risk averse, so they're more willing to spend more money on the Holiday Inn than your Airbnb. And I think that's two things that are really, really important
Definitely.
there. So I think this has been a great episode, Sam, and I genuinely think you've given so much value. So to round it off, one of the questions that I basically ask everyone who comes on is if you were starting again and you were going again and you had 60 seconds to compound as much advice into young Sam's brain, what would you say to him?
I guess the advice I'd give based on all the experiences I've had and money I've lost is get educated first. Um, and not only get educated, but go to someone for mentorship, even if it's going to cost you that bit more money, because otherwise it will cost you in the long run. And you will suffer financially, unfortunately. That's just the reality because you'll be making the same mistakes as that person would have made. Only you'll have to make them now and then realize that you didn't need to make the same mistakes. It's the saying goes, um, you know, or if when you're younger, for example, and your parents tell you, oh, don't walk in front of a road. You don't need to walk in front of a road and get hit by a car to know that you don't need to walk in front of a road. But unfortunately, for some reason in business, we think we just need to go through it and experience it ourselves. And as much as you tell yourself, oh yeah, don't make the same mistakes as somebody else, we end up doing it. So I think the main thing is get educated, get mentorship. Whether it's going to cost you a bit of money, it's going to save you money in the long run. So I think education is so important.
Okay. Now, because you've opened that can of worms, I have to ask one more question, even though I usually wouldn't. How do you know who to pick when getting educated? because I think that's a key bit of advice that people miss is what would you look for in a mentor, having been through mentorship, starting again?
I think get specific. I think there's a lot of mentors that do a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
I think you've nailed it there.
there's a lot of mentors that do a lot, and it's very surface level. So
Yeah,
pick someone that is specific in whatever that might be that you want to do, and get very specific on that aspect of business. Because otherwise, you're gonna learn a lot of nothing. I find. So yeah, I think being specific on whatever that might be you want to do, and find someone who can teach you that in very fine detail.
yeah. Okay, well, that was a great answer. This has been the Founders File podcast, and thank you so much for Sam for coming on. It's been a great episode.
No problem. Cheers for having me.